so that we can get started. It always makes a big deal of telling us, doesn't it? Okay, so hello, welcome to YWCA Toronto's Advocacy Table Election Special. We have these tables once a month to really get together and talk about advocacy issues, which obviously run the gamut from employment, gender-based violence, housing, a lot of the income security concerns, whatever it is that's touching our community, we want to be here talking about it as a community. So I am going to begin with a land acknowledgement because we are very honored to be living and working in this space. So as we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that YWCA Toronto operates in the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Pitsin First Nations, the Seneca and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We're grateful to work on this territory as we strive to build a more equitable and just city for women, gender diverse people and girls. And we also continue to mourn the children whose graves have been and continue to be found on the sites of so-called residential schools, and both acknowledge, learn about, and actively resist the ongoing colonialism and genocide experienced by Indigenous people today. I'm Sarah Boesveld, Manager of Advocacy here at YWCA Toronto. So I am recording, we're in webinar mode. So for folks that have joined us today, when it's usually sort of a meeting, we changed it up because we've got these guests with us today, which we're very lucky to have. And so we will be sharing this afterwards with our community so people can see it. So just very quickly, high level, before we get into our introductions, the hashtag Your Voice Matters campaign has been live for a week. That's our campaign for the federal election and continues until E-Day, which is next Monday, so less than a week. Advanced polling just closed last night, so hopefully you could get out there already. But if not, you have your chance on Monday. We encourage you to sign into our petition, amplify the campaign on social media, print off, and post a digital poster at your site if you haven't already, and access our internal resources, which includes a really great voting guide, which is really helpful for program participants who are even maybe new to this process of an election. That's on our shared drive, Advocacy and Communications, in the federal election 2021 folder. So we have other information too, of course, on our site. So I'm going to introduce each candidate to join us today, and this is actually going to be the order that I will ask us to answer the questions that I've shared with you and that relate to these campaign priorities. So we've got Elizabeth Robertson, is the Green Party candidate for Mississauga Lakeshore. Elizabeth holds an honors degree in political science and additional certifications in public policy, administration, and constitutional law. She's also pursuing a double master's in public policy, administration, and law at York while running for office, and is a mother of three. In her spare time, she's actively involved in advocating for Indigenous rights and a lot of other efforts that we were talking about before we went live. So hello, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll just let you quickly say hi.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. I just want to say hello. So yes, thank you again so much, Sarah, for hosting this. Just one other thing. So my family is Indigenous. My children are First Nations. And I had my first little angel on the reserve. So that was challenging, but of course, we'll be glad to be back in the city.
Oh, thank you for adding that. Thanks so much. That's wonderful. And then we've got Nicole Robicheau, the NDP candidate for University of Rosedale. As a humanitarian worker, Nicole has helped people flee crises and fought for human rights. And she's responded to cholera outbreaks in Sierra Leone and Ebola in West Africa, as well as supporting humanitarian efforts in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. A queer and non-binary activist, Nicole has worked to help build a future where racism, discrimination, homophobia, and transphobia have no place in Canada. Great to have you with us, Nicole. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I also just wanted to add as well, in addition to the land acknowledgement that was done, that New Democrats will work side by side with Indigenous peoples towards true reconciliation and in full respect of Indigenous rights. And we want to ensure that all Indigenous communities have access to clean water and safe homes.
Thank you for adding that. And we will definitely be interested in hearing more about where your parties are at on a lot of these issues. So thank you. And Marci Ien is the Liberal candidate for Toronto Centre. Marci is a devoted community leader here in Toronto, a journalist, and a member of Parliament. Wow, I've changed your jurisdiction on you already, Marci, in the middle of federal election. Sorry about that. For Toronto Centre since October 2020, when she won the by-election. Over 3 award-winning decades in journalism, this mother of 2 has traveled with Journalists for Human Rights and World Vision and has worked as a mentor with after-school programs for underprivileged youth. I know there's a lot more I could add to from all 3 of your impressive profiles, but thank you, Marci, for joining us. If you have anything to add, you want to say hi? For it.
Hi to everyone. Sarah, hello, and thanks for inviting me. What esteemed company, Elizabeth and Nicole. It's a pleasure to be with you. Really looking forward to a good conversation. This is great.
Great, thank you. And I did want to add, we had also invited conservative candidates to come, a number of them. So we have extended those invites, and time was certainly ticking in this election. So we came up with the roster that we could for this conversation today about gender equity. So thank you so much. We also want to emphasize YWCA Toronto is one of the oldest and largest multi-service nonprofits in the city, serving women, gender diverse people and girls. We're a leading provider of affordable housing, employment training programs, girls programs, and gender justice advocacy. So I'm going to ask each candidate a question related to the 4 gender equity pillars of the campaign that are reflected in the petition and on our site. So those are childcare, affordable housing, income security, and gender-based violence. So they'll all get the same question, and we'll go around in the order of the introductions. I'll certainly cue, of course, and then before moving on to the next one. So it's kind of like a round for I guess like the debates do too. We'll open the floor for you to ask questions after that. So please pop them in the Q&A area or in the chat. And if you'd like to ask the question verbally, just message me or Tosin, who's also here from our team, and I'll invite you to unmute and ask your question when the time arrives. So that'll be towards the end. Okay, ready to go? It's a conversation. It's not a debate. We're just going to have a real great opportunity to go over these gender equity lens issues. So, Elizabeth, let's start with you, and I'm going to begin with childcare. So here in Toronto, we contend with some of the highest costs for childcare spots in the country, with a serious lack of spaces. We've seen long wait lists for families hoping to find quality care for their kids and are really struggling to do so. So what does your party bring to the table that will provide a solution to this? And then, I mean, if it touches your life in any way, we'd love to hear about that too. So go for it, Elizabeth.
Excellent. Thank you again so much. I don't know if I have an official timer, but I'll just go ahead. Don't worry, they'll be short and sweet.
I'll just do this or something.
So for myself, yes, I'm a mother of 3 children. My children are Indigenous, and my children have special needs. My daughter attends a school in University of Rosedale. She is globally developmentally delayed, and she has severe autism. There are glaring gaps on reserve and, of course, off reserve. For me, looking at the plans, the Greens support something that will work in my family. So we do support a universal childcare, and the principles that we want to ensure is that childcare needs are different for different people. It shouldn't matter based on work status if you do have access to childcare, if you don't have access to childcare. For myself personally, I have taken subsidized childcare when I used to work at a gas station overnight, when I used to work at a coffee shop. So the idea of those who are women and families that have part-time employment, self-employed, or contractors should be taken into consideration, especially those who are seasonal workers in the tourism industry here in Toronto. The other thing that we would add to our childcare platform is including better parental leave, again, making it more inclusive for elderly family members to be taken care of. God forbid, of course, if there's a miscarriage, and making it more flexible and better paid. In terms of numbers, our numbers is that we would hope that 1% of the GDP annually, so our GDP is $1.7 trillion, 1% of that is dedicated to childcare. And lastly, like I mentioned, as my family is Indigenous, there needs to be a focus to equitable access of high quality and culturally appropriate childcare. That would also include for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. And again, ensuring the training and recruitment of well-paid and professional staff. Many of us have had to use the Living Caregiver program, or we've used the Super Visa program to kind of make the ends meet for our childcare. So for Greens, we do support a universal childcare.
Thank you so much for that, Elizabeth. Nicole, you want to let us know what your party's plans are for childcare?
Yes, I'll start as well with my own personal connection. I grew up with a single mom, my sister and and I saw how much of a struggle it was for her with very little access to supports, trying to work and eventually putting herself through school. So I carry that with me, even though I don't have children myself. I also see the impact now on my sister, who has 2 children and lives in the city as well. When she had her second child, she decided not to go back to work because it would cost more for childcare for the 2 kids than the money that she could make, which is completely unacceptable. New Democrats we don't believe that you should have to choose between having a family and paying for having a family and having a career. So really it's time to have affordable quality childcare across the country. So we'll immediately take action to save not-for-profit childcare centers that are at risk of closure because of COVID-19. And from there, we'll immediately work with provinces to implement $10 a day childcare system that's there for all parents. And we also really will actually create enough spaces so families don't spend months on waiting lists, and ensure that childcare workers as well are paid a fair living wage.
Thank you so much for that. Marci, the Liberals' plan for childcare.
Thank you, Sarah. It is something that I have talked about at the doors throughout this election, and something obviously that came up during the by-election, and something that I brought back to caucus and said, listen, we've got to do better. We've got to do something about this. So we've got a plan, and the plan is a universal one. And I keep telling everybody, listen, if we're back, we're going to get it done. And it's evident that we are, because 8 provinces and territories have signed on. And it's interesting to note that these are not just Liberal premiers that have done this. This goes across party lines. 8 provinces and territories. I will note Ontario is not one of them yet. But what this plan does is that it would cut childcare in half by 2022. So just a number for you, okay? If childcare, and it does, costs $22,000 annually. If that is cut in half, that means $11,000. That's significant. That's a big difference by 2022. And then within 5 years, $10 a day childcare. We've talked about women being disproportionately impacted in this pandemic, and we have been. Nicole talked about, women having to make that choice, her sister having to make that choice of, might as well, I have to stay at home because when I look at the numbers, it doesn't make sense for me to be working. We don't want women, we don't want anyone to have to make that choice. And it is about providing more spaces. It is about providing more workers, ECE workers, and we're doing that. And it's, someone stopped me just yesterday, a young man in Regent Park, and he said, Marci, if you're back in, we need this childcare to get done. It is the #1 thing in our family. We're thinking of having a child, and we need to know that this is going to work, and it's going to work for us. So it is top priority for us. And it's something, this is not a dream. This is not a whim. It's getting done. Contracts have been signed.
Thank you, Marci. Okay, so we are moving on. Affordability, obviously is a theme because this subject really rolls into the next, which is housing, affordable housing. So speaking of expensive and very little available, market rent in Toronto has not kept pace with the cost of living, nor do we have the supply to shorten wait lists for supportive housing, which we certainly deal with here at YWCA. It's desperately needed by low-income families, and in particular, women fleeing abusive situations. So again, what's your party's plan to address this here in Toronto? And how have you noticed this crunch playing out where you sit in your community? Elizabeth?
Thank you again so much. So municipalities face the unusual burden of having to address the gaps in our social safety net. There is a great challenge in housing. We don't give municipality the things that they need to address it, and we don't allow them the opportunity to raise money to do so. One example, I'll use Mississauga, which is my riding, Mississauga Lakeshore. The challenge is the city doesn't actually own that many parcels or lots or land. So they can't build affordable housing, even though they want to build it. The only option they have is to negotiate with developers to see what percentage of housing units they can get. Now, will that address housing? Probably not. For the Greens, there's 2 things that we feel very confidently to implement immediately. The first is the National Right of Housing Network and the Center for Equality Rights in Accommodation has stated that evictions are something that's really happening. The encampments that are happening all across the Greater Toronto Hamilton area are happening. So we need to prevent people from being evicted. We recommend a retroactive residential arrears assistance program to ensure families that are on the lower income are not evicted from their homes, and children don't have to go to living in the shelters, which are almost at full capacity. The second biggest plank for us is to allocate 1% of the GST to housing and other municipal infrastructures on an ongoing basis. And that would include the Green Municipal Fund. Right now, the Federation is not getting what they need, and we and the federal government have the opportunity. As an opposition MP, I would put amendments that would force the government to ensure the municipalities get what they need. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Nicole?
Yes, yeah, I mean, affordable housing is such a challenge across the city right now. I've actually seen in the past several months, people in my community, some of whom grew up in the city, having to leave. New Democrats have a plan to create 500,000 units of affordable housing in the next 10 years, and we want to do half of that in the next 5 years. We will also work in partnership with the provinces and municipalities to build the capacity for social, community, and affordable housing providers, and to provide rental support as well for co-ops, and considering as well the environment and environmental energy efficient goals as well. This plan will also create thousands of jobs across the country, which will jumpstart the economy and COVID recovery, helping Canadians get the affordable housing that they need. We'll also set up a dedicated fast start funds to streamline the application process as well. And as well, turning unused and underused properties into vibrant new communities. These measures will help address the crisis at the source, but we also need to make sure that families get the help that they need in the interim as well. So that's why we'll also provide families immediate relief who are struggling to afford rent while we bring forward these long-term solutions.
Thank you, Nicole. Marci?
Thanks so much, Sarah. It is the #1 issue in Toronto Centre in my riding. And I think there are different approaches here, and I'll just lay out what our government has done. You've got to name a problem. You've got to name it, you've got to recognize it. And after years of Conservative governments being frankly absent on housing, we did the first ever national housing strategy. And what that means is that it removes 530,000 families from home housing needs and cuts chronic homelessness by 50%. Those are big numbers, but we're working to do that. $1.3 billion, 1.3 billion has been put forward to support the renovation of almost 60,000 affordable housing units, and that work is happening. This is not something that's happening in the future, it's happening now. In Toronto Centre, I was so pleased to be part of an announcement recently on Parliament Street, where a building had been retrofitted do
Cutting out just a slight bit, Marci, at least for me.
Oh,
Yeah. Sorry, you're having trouble, Marci.
about that.
Do you want to just repeat maybe like the last 2 sentences that you said? I think we'll
yes,
be okay.
yes,
Yes,
I will. I was talking, it's okay. I was talking about the $2.5 billion investment in the Rapid Housing Initiative. And this is really exciting because with Rapid Housing, it means shovels in the ground and housing complete within 12 months. That's why it's called Rapid. So in Toronto Centre, we had an announcement just before the writ dropped, and it's 24 housing units. 24 may sound like a small number, but in my community, housing units are often smaller, and you have multi-generational families living in smaller spaces. These are larger, and they're 2 and 3 bedroom units that can house families, and there's more to come. And we know that we have to do better on this. The other part of that $2.5 billion investment in rapid housing states that 25% of the projects must go specifically to women-focused housing projects. And that's huge. That's absolutely huge. So there is more coming. We know that we have to do better, but it really is about listening, about learning what families need and delivering. And we're doing that.
Thank you so much, Marci. Okay, now on to income security. This touches all dimensions of our work here at YWCA Toronto, of course. Income security is a huge issue, impacts a lot of the communities we work with, particularly during this ongoing pandemic. I have to say that, right? Ongoing pandemic, sadly, the case. How will your party respond to the deep levels of poverty we're seeing and address concerns that this could all just get worse if something isn't done to tackle affordability and social supports specifically as well? Elizabeth?
Thank you. So this is my academic brain putting the hat on. So after World War II and after the Great Depression, there were some needs that we had, and the Constitution was amended to allow employment insurance to fall under federal jurisdiction. As of right now, poverty is a challenge, and the provinces right now, maybe they won't admit it, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Living on $700 a month on Ontario Works, living on, if they're lucky, $1,200 for ODSP, living on CPP, OAS, and GIS near poverty levels, not including those who are in the First Nations community who are both on and off reserve who are struggling. I think a comprehensive, equitable, guaranteed livable income is the best solution. We've done it before in the 40s with the Employment Insurance Act. It is nothing that we can't do now. If we look at our market-based measure, we have the data from Statistics Canada. We know what a livable level of income is in different regions. And I feel that there should be a little bit more will so that seniors are not in poverty, that women who are in permanent residence applications are having to suffer because, again, if they risk upsetting their spouse that's sponsoring them, they're going to risk violence. So a guaranteed livable income would actually address most of the concerns that we mentioned. Again, it would cover everyone, and the benefit will gradually decrease in other areas. But in terms of looking at people, I cannot stomach having someone living on $700 a month. So a guaranteed livable income for every person in Canada, again, is something that is close to me. And just to mention as well, when I was on the reserve, when I had my son, the three of us were living on $8,500. The place that we stayed in didn't have water because the water dried up. So for 8 months of my child's life, I had to go to a neighbor to access water. I don't know how much more poverty could be mentioned than that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Elizabeth. Nicole, what's your answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, I really think if there's maybe one positive that we can take out of this pandemic is that it's really exposed the cracks in our system in ways that I think some of us had never seen before. And if you think about homelessness, for example, if you remove everything, if you remove all of the businesses, if they're all closed, nobody's commuting to work, all you really see is that. And so I do think it is an opportunity for us to invest in providing support to those who are most vulnerable in our communities. Really, and for instance, frontline workers who we know were disproportionately impacted, forced to go to work without sick days. So one of the things that the NDP really wants to push for is protecting frontline workers by boosting the federal minimum wage, bringing in paid sick leave. We want to expand healthcare and to include pharmacare and dental care, as well as mental health supports, which we know are very needed after this crisis or during this crisis, as we're still in it. And we as well want to introduce a basic guaranteed livable income, and we'll immediately begin that by providing it to folks living with a disability to boost them up above the poverty line. And really the NDP, we're the ones who fought to really double the CERB and really have it accessible to more people during the pandemic. So we want to continue that fight.
Thank you, Nicole. Marci, how will the Liberal Party respond to the income security concerns that are ongoing this pandemic and are obviously well preceded?
Yeah, well, we are in it, but prior to it, we have lifted 1.3 million Canadians out of poverty, and that is through our poverty reduction strategy. We've been laser focused on this from the very beginning, but Nicole is so right that there are lessons to be learned from this pandemic. And it's an opportunity for us. The Band-Aid has been ripped off. We see who the most vulnerable are in our society, and it's an opportunity to do better for sure. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB, helped 8.9 million Canadians keep food on the table, make sure that they could pay their bills. And I'll tell you, in door knocking and just connecting with people in my riding, there's so many people who said, thank you. And that's not something that you normally hear. I'm always up for, great conversation when speaking to people, but I can't tell you how many people said thank you, because this helped us to keep the lights on. And not only thank you, but thank you for being so quick, for reacting so quickly. And we did. Also, the child benefit for families across this country. We had a top up that they got in June, a one-time top up, but that helped. And for students as well, I've got Ryerson University, George Brown in my riding of Toronto Centre, and interest has been waived on loans for students. And that is huge. And that's something that if we're reelected, we're going to continue.
Thank you. Y'all are so good at being very succinct in your answers. Thank you for that. We're only at 12:30. So a little applause for, I guess you're very well practiced too with the campaign being more than halfway through. So I have our last question now about gender-based violence. So, we were just talking about the pandemic and the impacts of that. And we've certainly seen a very troubling rise in the severity of gender-based violence during this pandemic, reported to shelters after that first lockdown lifted. And we're seeing higher rates of femicide in Ontario this year over past year. And that's documentation that's been done by the Ontario Association of Interval Transition Housing, OATH. What will your party do to contend with gender-based violence as a systemic issue and get at the roots of the problem? And what kind of investment or response is needed for this? Elizabeth?
Well, I'll just say the roots of the problem first. Obviously, we do know there's an increased rate of gender-based violence. There is more economic stress for households. There is the increased burden of caregiving, and I'll say it, housework, because I have 3 little angels. And there's been a reduced access to support services, obviously, to keep the workers safe. We've had to close down some of our support services. There's some great ones in each of our ridings who want to help the community, like Compass or Sistering or many others, but again, they have to protect their workers. For us, for Greens, the number one would be the implementation of all recommendations for the inquiry of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. My daughter is First Nations, and my daughter can become a statistic. My daughter is vulnerable. So for myself, personally, that's a strong thing that I'm glad the Greens are willing to do. Of course, we need to increase access to the shelters by investing $40 million over 4 years in the shelter enhancement program, and hopefully providing more than 2,100 new renovated first stage shelters and hundreds of spaces and transitional housing. Transitional housing is a very important step as well for those fleeing. Again, and oppose any possible government intervention that would deny a woman the right to choose. I know it's hard to mention it in this answer, but sometimes that violence is about a woman's right to choose. And I want to make sure that whoever is elected, whoever forms government, that is protected. And again, to consider girls and gender diverse people. Again, the elimination of violence impacts women, girls, and those of gender diverse. Again, the trans community has had some hard times as well, and I don't want us not to mention that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole, the response to gender-based violence from the NDP.
Yeah, Elizabeth, thank you for bringing the trans women and non-binary folks into the discussion as well. As somebody who identifies as non-binary, I've certainly seen the impact in my community, and especially those most marginalized in my community, disproportionately impacted. I also want to mention as well, as someone who responds to crises, to natural disasters, conflicts, and epidemics, this is something that comes up every single time. The rates of gender-based violence always increase after every crisis. And I've really seen that firsthand every time. So the NDP's plan is to really to make sure that women's organizations have core and stable funding so that women can access, or women and gender diverse folks can access the support and advocacy they need and when they need it. And we want to tackle femicide and deliver a national action plan to end gender-based violence, backed by funding to ensure that shelter services and other programs are available across the country. We also want to update the labor code as well to include 10 days of paid sick leave for those who are dealing with family and domestic violence, as well as improve police training on sexual assault and require universities to develop plans and end sexual violence on campus, which again has come up in the news recently. And like Elizabeth, we want to work with Indigenous peoples to implement all the calls of justice of the National Inquiry.
Thank you so much for that, Nicole. Okay, Marci.
Thank you so much, Sarah. You know, the bottom line is that home just isn't a safe place for everyone. And that's women and that's children. And we've seen the numbers during this pandemic and continue, frankly, to see them. Since 2015, the Liberal government has supported a total of more than 400 projects, 400 of them working to address this. And that has been costed out to $145 million. Those are big numbers, but I want to bring it back to my riding of Toronto Centre, because as part of Canada's COVID-19 emergency response plan, there was actually a package for gender equality Canada, and that received $90 million to fund 1,200 organizations. And some of those organizations are in Toronto Centre. So I'm thinking of Women's Health in Women's Hands. I'm thinking of Up With Women that specifically addresses gender-based violence and provides shelter to so many women in my riding. I'm thinking of Times Change. I'm thinking of Native Child and Family Services. So many agencies and organizations who are dedicated to help and frankly are places of shelter for the women who have experienced violence like this. It is a crisis. It really is when it comes to gender-based violence. And if this pandemic has shown us anything, it has shown us who is most vulnerable. And just thinking about our conversation, and gender-based violence is our last question, but if I look at poverty, when we talked about childcare, and I'm looking at all these things, the common denominator is women. And one, you know, we've got to think, we mentioned mental health, but we've got to think when women have the burden of having to choose their job or take care of their kids, or as Elizabeth said, the housework too, because it's the unpaid work, and then the mental health burdens, and then possibly facing violence at home or elsewhere. That's a lot. That is a lot for us to bear. And no wonder we're breaking under that load. So our Liberal government has seen that. And I want to shout out the Women's Caucus that has led the way. Miriam Monsaf, who was the minister responsible, has done so much on this file. I'm thinking of Patty Hajdu, who was the Minister of Health. So many women, Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister, who has really been a trailblazer in so many ways, but of putting women's issues forward. I was the 100th woman to be sworn into Parliament when I won the by-election in October, and that, you know, I will never take for granted. We need so many more female voices, women's voices, diverse voices in Parliament, because these are the things that matter. And when women are there and at the table and in the halls of power, these are the things that get addressed. And it's a pleasure to be with you today. Just brilliant, all of you.
Thank you, Marci. That was clearly an omission from the bio, 100th woman in office. Thank you for raising that. That's amazing. And thank you for answering all those questions, the four questions. They really do underpin what we're trying to elevate as issues in this federal election, as 10 minutes long as it is of an election. And so thank you as well for all the hustle and all the heart that you're bringing forward as candidates. I mean, it is no small thing to put your hat in the ring. And so anyone who does that really deserves some kudos. So thank you personally, but I'm sure I speak for many others too who feel that way as well. So now's the fun part. Not that that wasn't fun, because obviously it was. To answer some questions from our community who've come and joined us today. So it looks like we have one in the chat from Tosin. Tosin told me this was submitted to us. So what will your party do about CERB repayment. And the question, it looks like, is amnesty on the table for low-income Canadians? So we'd like to hear from everybody. And so I guess I'm sure you'll elaborate a little bit more in your answers, but to sort of provide context to the question, it's kind of, obviously Marci talked about the benefit, but there are folks on low incomes who are now being asked to pay that money back, and they did need it, as Marci said, to keep food on the table during that pandemic. So, but they may have prior to the pandemic struggled to keep food on the table. So Elizabeth, do you want to take that one first?
Thank you so much. I think that that really highlights a problem. CERB was a great program, and no one is going to say that it was not. But the instructions initially, and the instructions during, and the instructions after were very confusing and complex. Again, some people might look at those and say, "Yes, I'm eligible." Now, the dedicated public servants in Canada Revenue Agency had warned potentially that the information given to the public would mean that some people would receive a payment that maybe would not be eligible. And I am glad that the Liberal Party did allow for those people to still apply for it, but now you've put people in a predicament where they owe thousands upon thousands of dollars back. Someone who's earning 21 or 22,000 a year, like how I was in my 20s when I worked at a gas station or when I worked in a coffee shop overnight, the idea of having to pay back $6,000 or $8,000, almost 50% of their income, is unimaginable. I think that during this time, I mean, I know we have land acknowledgements, but we need to have a time acknowledgement. This is a devastating thing that's happened to us globally. And there has to be some pathway, I guess, to forgiveness. For everyone, I would just recommend to use the Green Party policy platform. Again, because I don't want to say the wrong number, but again, in our eyes, you cannot fault the public for not understanding the 3 different sets of instructions. And I don't think that families who are living below the low income cutoff point should be forced to pay almost 50% of what their income is back to the federal government. I think the federal government will be okay.
Thank you so much for that answer. Nicole, do you want to take that one too? Server payment?
Yeah, I mean, our entire platform, the NDP's entire platform, is really based on taking care of those who are most vulnerable and making the rich pay their fair share. So we don't think that the folks who are disproportionately impacted and already surviving on very little money are the folks who should be targeted right now. We should be targeting those who have made money off of this pandemic. And so a lot of our plan is based on essentially a new tax 1% over anything over 10 million, and using that money to put back into our sort of social safety system. And so yeah, I mean, that's what I think we should be focusing our attention on right now, and not those who we're still, as we say, we're under the pandemic still continuing to suffer during this time.
Marci, what's your response regarding CERB repayment?
As mentioned before, this is an evolving situation. So CERB started because we had to act quickly. And so it was just make sure that people are okay and they can keep food on the table. It's also not, a blanket covers all situation. I would encourage people to really do the research and check with the CRA, because not everybody that gets CERB has to repay CERB. It's not a one size fits all situation. So it really is about understanding, what your situation is, what the CRA says, and going from there. But I will say that it is an evolution. And if people are in dire straits and can't afford to pay, there will be solutions. And most definitely, I have worked with people in my office with the CRA, constituents who have had issues, and worked to come up with solutions. And I'm prepared to continue to do that as their voice in Ottawa.
Okay, thank you. It looks like that was a good warm up. Now I've got some more questions coming in. So it has an interesting one. You know how it is. Y'all know how it is. Has an interesting one from that is also about money. So no one has addressed tax reform, and the big issues that we've discussed, all four, can be directly affected by tax reform. I think Nick DeBrian is saying Nicole did touch on it briefly, but can we talk about sort of what we do with our taxes to address these issues that feel so intractable, I guess, in a lot of ways? Elizabeth?
Excellent. Well, the Green Party platform speaks for itself, so I won't get too much into it. And again, I would recommend to please visit the website, greenparty.ca, to review our platform. We all know that since the 1950s, what the corporations pay and what the federal government receives versus what they're paying now is disproportionately affected. We are collecting more in personal income taxes than we're collecting for corporations. So the Green Initiative is just very simple. Again, it's equity. It's making sure that we're all able to live in dignity. Again, I do know that some of the other platforms like the NDP and Liberal have elements, but we feel it's not enough. And again, the reason why we want to have a fair taxing is support the guaranteed livable income. Thank you.
Nicole, you did briefly touch on it, but let's go a little deeper on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing maybe to mention is just really closing the loopholes that allow money to be taken offshore and not taxed. So I think that's a big one as well that the NDP want to focus on. And yeah, I mean, really not raising taxes again for those of us who make very little, but going after those who have profited from the pandemic and made a lot of money and making them pay their fair share.
Marci.
Thanks so much for the question. It is about taxing the big banks. We have put that forward, reducing foreign ownership of homes, which inflates our housing prices, is a huge one too. Discouraging those who would flip homes and make money that way, taxing them as well, and providing some subsidies for seniors, for students, as I mentioned, and also EI for gig workers. I forgot to mention that, and I want to talk about that a little bit because we are in different times now where people may not have a job for 20 years or 30 years with a pension at the end. We are very much in a gig economy and we recognize that. So EI for gig workers comes into play as well.
Thank you. Okay, I have an anonymous attendee question. This is very mysterious. Everyone's views expressed here all sound positive and proactive, but in order to help us differentiate your views as a party to the others, why should I vote for you or your party specifically? So that's a nice broad question, but it's a good chance for you to get into door knocking campaign mode. Why you? Why your party? To help sell this community member. Elizabeth?
Excellent. I hope everyone doesn't mind. The next round, if we want to make it alternate, who goes first? I love the being first, but again, I want to be fair as well.
But everyone gets their turn, so I feel like it's cyclical. It's all right.
Okay. Excellent. So for myself, again, I'm looking at Elizabeth May. In 2015, opposition MP, she did 2 amendments. Fast forward to now. She's been able to do 48 amendments at committee level. Again, an opposition MP has the ability to really drive down home what the riding and our communities need. Again, sometimes there are limitations of being part of official government. There is, I don't want to say the word backbencher, but I'm going to say it. Sometimes as a backbencher MP, there's not really that many opportunities. You bring items to caucus, you try to make recommendations, and if they get shot down, they get shot down. However, as an opposition MP, you can be sure that you will have someone who will be dedicated to fighting for you. You will have someone who can go to committee to provide amendments that are going to help your local community. And again, when I look at Paul Manley and Elizabeth May, those 2 Green MPs are on so many shadow cabinets and so many things that they're doing, just the 2 of them. Again, an opposition MP can really bring the things that we need to ensure that we have a just society and that we have ability to live with dignity. And again, working collaboratively together, that's the most important thing. That's what a Green MP will bring. Thank you.
Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that we've really seen what an NDP government can do throughout this pandemic by really pushing the Liberal government to double the CERB, to have supports for students. So I think that really an NDP government is a government that cares about people, that cares about making life better for you and for me. And certainly when I'm talking to folks at the doors, the big issues they bring up, climate is a really big one, and also a big one for me as someone who has a background in humanitarian work and has seen the impact of disasters happening more and more frequently year after year. Affordable housing, again, we've talked about it. That's another big issue as well. And I really do think that the NDP has the best platform to tackle those issues and to really make life better for those of us who are most vulnerable in our communities.
Okay, Marci, why should the community members vote Liberal?
I love this question. I love this question, and I'm going to make it extremely personal. Because if you would have told me a couple of years ago, even 19 months ago, that I would be doing this job, I would have laughed and I would have said, absolutely not, because I had no intention. And what changed for me was the killing of George Floyd and everything that happened around that killing, because it was George Floyd, it was Ahmaud Arbery, there was so much going on. And I was sitting there in studio as part of a talk show. And I very much loved my job as a journalist and as a host, but I was sitting there and thinking, as I talked about these things and talked about my vision for the country, I'm either going to talk about these things or I'm going to do something about these things. And when the riding of Toronto Centre came up, it was riding that I was born in, St. Jamestown, welcomed my family back in the 60s, my parents, when they emigrated from Trinidad and Tobago. And I thought, my gosh, it's full circle. I can try to give back and be a voice for the community where our family's story started. I had been an only throughout most of my career. I was the first Black woman to co-host a national morning show. I was usually one of maybe a couple or the only in newsrooms that I worked in. And that meant that I was always advocating. I was always advocating because of my lived experience, advocating for diversity. And when I talked about being the 100th woman sworn into Parliament, what I didn't mention was that I was the only Black woman in Parliament last session, the 43rd session. That has to change. But what it enabled me to do was to be that voice, and a voice that is being heard, because I've seen recommendations that I made just as an MP show up in our platform. Things like rent to own, childcare, gender-based violence issues, all of those things, when ministers came to chat or we did virtual conversations, those are things that I advocated for. And that's shown me that, I can make a difference, our team can make a difference, and that it's necessary for me and people that look like me to be there. We have the most diverse riding in the country, and it is diverse in every way. I always say that it looks like a little piece of Canada, but I'm proud to represent it. I'm the first woman of color to represent the riding and to be the MP of Toronto Centre, and I don't take that for granted for a second. And so to continue the work that we started some 10 months ago, I need your vote.
Thank you. Hopefully that answered this anonymous attendee's question. Appreciate it. One other one in the Q&A, Q in the Q&A. How will your party respond to urgent calls for greater affordability and help renters during the pandemic? If you don't want to go first, Elizabeth, we could totally, it occurred to me after I was like, she was put on the spot to go first. I did not give you the option. So Marci's putting her hand up. Okay, Marci, go.
So I just talked about taking ideas back to caucus, and housing was a huge, and still is, but it's what I heard about most in the by-election, just talking to multi-generational families in Regent Park or Moss Park or St. Jamestown, 8 people living in a 2-bedroom, or the idea of generational wealth and how disproportionately people of color in our country don't own their homes. They mostly rent. And it's not that they don't want to own, it's that they have issues raising the money needed for a down payment. And it's the numbers are brutal, frankly. And so we started to talk about rent to own a lot. And that's something that I brought back, and it's something that's part of our platform. The idea that you can negotiate with your landlord, not for profit, for instance. So if it's the TCHC, you can negotiate with your landlord, and the rent that you're paying can go towards actually owning that home. And I want to be clear, there is affordable housing, and then there's housing affordability. So I've talked to, many a young couple who've said, listen, we make, and supportive housing, right, as well. I've talked to many a young couple who've said, listen, we make decent salaries and we've been renting this condo for a while. We'd really like to buy it, and that's not possible. So rent to own works on either end of the spectrum there. And that is something that we put forward, and it's something that we're dedicated to doing.
Now
I made it like a Wild West. I don't know, Elizabeth, Nicole.
Sure, I can go next. Yeah, I mean, I think we talked a bit earlier about the plans around housing, the NDP's plan to build 500,000 units of affordable housing across the country. I do maybe want to touch on supportive housing because you mentioned that, Sarah, and it's something that I think a lot about. My partner actually works in housing and providing support to folks experiencing homelessness in the city. So we have these discussions a lot, and building units is not enough in a lot of instances. It's about having the support and wraparound services for folks. And part of that, something that I feel very, very passionate about is and this is at the federal level, having more safe supply sites and having more safe consumption sites, because I've seen the positive impact that can have on communities. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that on the. Oh, was I on mute that whole time?
No, you weren't. I pressed a button by accident. That was I'm so sorry. Elizabeth, quickly, we have one more question. I'm really hoping we could squeak in, if that's possible. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just squeak in. Yeah, because they've mentioned a lot of other topics. The other thing I want to mention is, because I'm a graduate student, I'm pursuing a double master's degree. And of course, students face a really tough challenge. It's either pursue your education and invest in yourself, or potentially pay a down payment. For those who are studying in university, who are doing their master's or PhD, or even their apprenticeships, they're being forced to make a choice to live in poverty while going to school, or to save up for a down payment. And again, just for the Greens, we want to make sure that we're giving students the opportunity to get into the market. So again, I would just ask to visit our website. I know we're short on time.
We'll share that too in the resources as well. Okay, a squeaker for the end, a big question, but hopefully we can be nice and succinct. We have a community member, Kaiser, had asked this question. Can you talk about your party's response to refugee crisis and upcoming immigration policies? So, a nice, very easy, not complex answer. Nicole.
I'll take that one first. I'm glad that this was brought up, actually, because this is an issue that I feel deeply about, and one of the things that I want to push forward. As an MP in Ottawa, I've been to many refugee camps all across the world, and what's been really frustrating for me over the past few years is to see how the current government portrays how open Canada is to refugees. And the reality is it's such a long bureaucratic process for folks to get here. And it's really, really difficult. And I've seen countless times when I tell people in refugee camps I'm from Canada, their faces light up because they've heard of the 25,000 Syrian refugees that were let in, and they have the impression that it is really easy to get to Canada. And I have to be the bearer of bad news and explain to them how difficult the process is, and in many instances impossible. So one of the things that I personally want to push for is to make it easier for folks fleeing violence to come here, and especially LGBTQ folks, as that's the community that I'm part of. And I know that Canada has started to put things in place to do that, but I think we really could be doing more. And I think we really could be more of a world leader on that, on the world stage.
Thank Thank you, Nicole. Very, very briefly, Marci and Elizabeth. Elizabeth, do you want to go first this time? And then, okay.
Yeah,
maybe-
I'll go quickly, because again, I know everyone's time sensitive for door knocking. So the exceptions in the safe third party country agreement are not sufficient. The Greens would terminate it. I have helped family members come in through the exceptions, and they're still not very helpful. Also, there is a bit of xenophobia in our immigration system. We have a program that allows French speakers to come into Canada to reside in Ontario, Alberta. And if you're coming from France, yeah, this pathway is for you. But if you're coming from Haiti, sorry, not applicable. So that's something that has to be addressed in all aspects of settlement in Canada. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, Marci, take it home. Thanks.
Yeah, I will quickly. There was an immigration cap on Africa, the continent, that we actually lifted. It was the only continent that had a cap, and we lifted it. Front lines. I can't tell you how many people, our team, me personally, have helped with permanent residents in Toronto Centre. Refugees, immigrants are the bulk of the people that I represent. And we've been there for them and will continue to be there for them. It's true, no system is perfect, but we've been there. And I don't even have time to tell you all of the personal stories, but there are so many, so many.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your time, the hour that you've taken out of your day today in a tight timeline of a race. Thank you again for stepping out there and vying for the opportunity and privilege to represent your communities in Ottawa. It is extremely appreciated, and YWCA Toronto salutes you all. And we do want to encourage everyone again here, if you have not voted yet and you have the ability to do so, please consider doing that on September 20th. And in the meantime, support our YWCA Toronto campaign, which really does advance a lot of the gender equity issues. And thank you for the opportunity to talk with this lens on these issues, because they, as I think one of you pointed out, they do all connect very much so. People's lives are nuanced, complex, and face, a lot of folks face a lot of barriers. So it's on us to speak up on election day and at every opportunity to really highlight how important really good policy making and really good representation, how crucial that is for our lives day to day. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Good luck. Have fun out there. We'll look forward to seeing you on the other side in whatever capacities and continuing to be connected. Thank you.
Sarah,
Bye.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Joining. Yeah.
Good luck, everybody. Bye.